Oh, and today we're going to be talking about something really interesting to me, and that is the Hussite Wars and the Kingdom of Bohemia, as well as a little bit about the Holy Roman Empire. Um, so yeah, we're going to go over the uh, identity of the Kingdom of Bohemia, like what it was, how it came about, uh, what the Hussite Wars were, and how that affected Europe within the time frame that it was a part of. So the uh, early 15th century, which is the start of the 1400s, and then the Holy Roman Empire and its role within the Kingdom of Bohemia and also um, the politics of the time during the Hussite Wars. All right, let's jump into it. We're going to take a look at the map of Bohemia before it was what it is. So right here we can see a map of Europe. Obviously, it tells us the date 250 BC. What we're looking at is the Celtic tribes and their population all across Europe. So a lot of people don't know this, but the Celts were the major population within Europe for a very long time. It wasn't until the Romans expanded first by driving out the Gauls and then into Hispania and then the other territories that the Celts started being pushed back and culturally replaced, as well as secluded into the Britannic Isles. The Germanic tribes also coming in the early, I guess, late BC to early AD centuries also helped to eliminate the Gallic and like other Celtic tribes within Europe, but it was mostly the Romans who took care of that. So we see on this map the area that says Hallstatt territory. Um, there was a tribe within this area that were called the Boii, spelled Boii. So, you know, pronounce a little bit weird if you want, but they were the ones who set up their tribe within the modern day lands of Czechia, which not so long ago was called Bohemia. All right, so now we see a map of the Slavs and their eminence within the 7th to 9th centuries. Specifically, though, we're going to go a little bit further back. During the late 5th to early 6th century, we have the first sighting of what became Czechs and Moravians settling within the lands of Bohemia, modern day Czechia or Czech Republic for whoever is listening. Um, So the Slavs took over a lot of the lands that the Germanic tribes, that had just pushed out Celts had been encompassing or rather settled on. So now the population is once again changing, and yet the land is still being called Bohemia. A little bit about the historical background for why Bohemia is called what it is. Um, Although it's kind of unrelated to the main topic, it is something interesting to know. So now we're going to start discussing the primacy of the Kingdom of Bohemia within the Holy Roman Empire and how it was able to attain and sustain the status that it had up until its acquiescence into the Habsburg Empire in the late stages of the Holy Roman Empire, close to the Reformation, Protestant Reformation, that is, period. So here's just a quick look at what the map overall looks like of the Holy Roman Empire within the year 1000. We're going to look at a better map that shows more of the HRE rather than just all of Europe. All right, so we did a little bit of a time jump as well with the new map, but that's not too big of a deal. This is in the year 1234. Right now, we can see a very fractured, disunited entity of the Holy Roman Empire. All those different colors, um, all those tiny little shapes, most of the time are their own independent countries. As in the HRE, a country could simply consist of a village, or it could consist of a kingdom. Um, Very autonomous, very disunited, but still it somehow functioned um, somewhat well when it came to law, judiciary, and maintaining its political identity as a German not necessarily state, but kingdom with a model after what the Western Roman Empire was, although it is very much separate from what one would call Rome. But here we can see, as it says, Königreich Böhmen, which that just means the Kingdom of Bohemia. Um, it looks pretty big compared to all the other small states that we see within inside the Holy Roman Empire. And yes, it is. It was preeminent at this time in 1234. Um, although the Premuslid dynasty has died out, uh, or no, as the Premuslid dynasty is about to go out, um, they've been not only the patrons of the Kingdom of Bohemia for a long time, but also the unifiers. They created it as the strongest entity within the Holy Roman Empire, as well as making it so that it is a permanent kingdom. As most of the titles that rulers have within the Holy Roman Empire are not allowed to be higher than a duke. So you have counts, dukes, bishops, archbishops, so on and so forth, until you have the emperor of the HRE, and the only kingdom being in this is the Kingdom of Bohemia. So, this Kingdom of Bohemia, why is that so big of a deal that it's a kingdom? Well, you see, uh, just the title of king gives more reputation and prestige within an entity that has no other kings. All right, makes sense, but how did this happen then? Okay, so this goes back to the ninth century, the end of the ninth century, roughly, when two Christian saints, um, Cyril and Methodius, who were essentially the missionaries who spread Christianity to all the Slavs, um, they went to Moravia. Great Moravia at the time was the entity which occupied the lands of Bohemia and then its surrounding territories. So like modern day Slovakia and Czechia, um, bits of Austria and bits of Poland. Um, but those two went there. They converted the nobles and the rulers, as so often happens when conversions occur. This allowed for a unification of the tribes into one greater entity. Um, Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that kinship comes with that, though. They were still considered dukes of Bohemia at the time. So initially, because they were a disunited state, the Slavic, say, principalities within the Bohemian lands were not very strong. But now that one, they've Christianized, and two, they have a king. Their first king being Frankislav II, uh, who is granted the title of king as a personal privilege from the Holy Roman Emperor. Um, it gives them a lot more power. And so a little bit later down the line, uh, there is another king, would-be king, who's granted the non-hereditary title of king, and that is Ottokar the First, and he gets this in 1198, so just about the 13th century. And Bohemia is the only kingdom within the Holy Roman Empire. This is very significant, as it will cause a great upset later in the future with other nations wishing to become kingdoms. So the Premuslid dynasty created the Christian kingdom of Bohemia. However, now they've died out. The Luxembourgs are now the kings of Bohemia. And yes, that is related to the city of Luxembourg. Um, the first on the throne is, well, I guess the first important one on the throne is Charles. Charles the Fourth. He becomes the first Holy Roman Empire or emperor that is seated in Bohemia. So he's the king of Bohemia and the emperor of the HRE. He does a lot of great things for the kingdom. He establishes the first university within Prague, or Praha, as Czechs call it. Um, He expands the territories of Bohemia, um, expanding eastwards and northwards a little bit, as well as, I guess, making Bohemia a very important player within external politics. Um, for example, with like Poland and Hungary, and so on and so forth, especially with Charles's future successors, that being his son, who rules the throne in Bohemia, Wenceslaus IV, and his other son, who becomes the king of Hungary, Sigismund. These two will be the stage for what starts the Hussite Wars. Um, However, they're just major players on the scene that was kind of set by some radicals. So we need to talk about those radicals first. Well, who are they? Okay, so we have Jan Hus, the leader and the progenitor of the Hussite movement, as well as John Wycliffe. Now, these two are considered the forerunners or forefathers of the Protestant Reformation. John Wycliffe, the first of these two, died in roughly 1384. He was an English um, well-educated guy, I guess. He went to the University of Oxford, although that didn't really do much for him because he was wrong. But he studied science and theology. Um, he worked for the king at the time, being a theologian within his court. And so there's a lot of stuff going on within the Catholic Church at this time. What was called the Western Schism was occurring during his lifetime. So the Western Schism saw multiple popes at the same time, essentially. So in roughly the year 1305, um, the pope that was elected was previously a French diplomat. So instead of, going to Rome where the seat of the Vatican resides, he stayed within the French territory, within the place that is called the Palace of the Popes in Avignon, um, for about 70 years, uh, roughly, I want to say the Pope resided within that location. There's 7 different popes who resided within Avignon. Um, However, towards the end of this, I want to say 1377, when the last pope who primarily resided in Avignon decided to locate back to Rome. This caused a little bit of a uprising. A new College of Cardinals was called. A second pope was elected, um, in Avignon, and so now there is one within Rome and one within um, Avignon, and these two were essentially political entities, no more spiritual figureheads. Because, well, hold on, why would we need 2 different popes? That doesn't make sense. Well, one was Italian, the other was French. Obviously, you can see where that is. There have been a lot of distaste within the Italian peninsula due to the fact that a lot of the popes have been French. Um, look into it if you want to, but it's really weird that, the head of the church is mostly of one nationality. It's almost like it's not just a spiritual figure, but it's more so a political figurehead. But anyway, um, that led to a lot of tension and debate between who was the real pope until there was a council held in Constance, which settled the issue and made it so that there's only one pope again who resided within Rome, not Avignon. So, like I just mentioned, there's a bunch of crazy stuff going on with the church. Um, and obviously, John Wycliffe, being observant of that, decides that he's going to write about things that should be changed. So, because of his disdain for the papacy, he decides to make an attack against it, essentially saying that um, only scripture is the basis of, you know, the church. That there's no traditions or any such stuff handed down from the generations past, which is just absurd because that's not how it's been practiced. through the early days of the church, or excuse me, or back before Christianity was around and Judaism existed. Very much so, tradition and the elders handed down a lot of how the church is supposed to play a role within the community and the nation. As long as he decided that the priesthood is not a thing that's ordained, it's just, oh, well, you're a priest, you're the same as all the other priests. Um, this was partly because he thought the Pope claiming, you know, the power that he claimed was the main issue with having someone who's claiming a higher level than other priests, despite the fact that apostolic succession is a thing and that ordination is not just a gib or a, thing that happens. It's more so a sacrament. He totally rejected that though. So after Wycliffe died, Jan Hus, once again being the guy in Bohemia, continued and followed with Wycliffe's teachings. Wycliffe, who was, excommunicated and made a heretic by the Catholic Church. Hus went a little bit further, especially more so with his action. Within the lands of Bohemia, there was obviously a lot of turmoil going on. We had currently Sigismund, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, also the King of Hungary, invading Bohemia because his half-brother, Wenceslaus IV, was doing a terrible job at running the kingdom compared to how their father was previously. Bohemia was also bankrupt. So there was war, bankruptcy, essentially just a terrible turn of events going on within the Kingdom of Bohemia. And Huss and his teachings were able to take over because a lot of the people who controlled the land were the clergy. You expect, oh, well, hold on. Nobility are supposed to be the landholders. That doesn't make sense. You're right, the nobility thought exactly that too. So a lot of nobles sided with either Sigismund to get rid of Wenceslaus, or some even sided with and converted to the Hussite faith, which is essentially proto-Protestantism. So, on that day it happened, the 30th of July, in the year of our Lord, 1418. Jan Zawlisky, a priest, a Hussite priest, was leading his congregation through the streets of the city in a procession in order to protest the church and their corruption. They came upon the city council in which a scuffle broke out, causing members of the protest, or the congregation, whichever you call it, to enter into the city hall, take the chief magistrate, and throw him out of the window of the building, killing him. Approximately 30 people in total died in this event, and this sparked the revolt of the Hussites against the Catholics. This would cause many, many years of war. There's several crusades called, 5 crusades specifically, to destroy and eradicate the Hussites, as they were a thorn in the side to much of what the Catholic Church um, held within Bohemia, as well as they were a nuisance to Emperor Sigismund, being the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He invaded Bohemia to deal with his brother and take the crown of Bohemia, but he stayed to deal with the Hussite uprising. Again and again, he went to pledge to defeat the Hussites. However, each time he failed, and each time the Pope called another attack against the Hussites. Notably, a lot of Hussites were able to hide within the Silesian lands, which is part of modern-day Poland, as there was a lot of people within that area who had not necessarily sentiment for them, but they're empathetic of their plight of being repressed by uh, the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. So the Hussites organized militias um, based on their rank. Most of the time, their leaders were also clergy or priests. Uh, One of their most famous being Jan Zizka, um, or Prokop the Younger. They did siege warfare. Um, Cannons had just become a thing within Europe, so the Hussites were actually some of the first to use cannons within normal battlefields, which would later become an issue as the Ottomans learned from the great use of cannons. But the Hussites were not all stable in their fight against the church, as there's two parties of Hussites, the Utraquists and the Taborites. The Utraquists were kind of moderate. The Taborites were completely extremist. They would have no holds barred when it came to fight or to war against the Catholic Church, and they would give no quarter, and they would have no compromise. These two factions often conflicted with each other with how they're going to um, carry out their goal of keeping the Hussite faith within Bohemia and strengthen it and trying to make it the dominant power within the lands. Eventually, this came to a head when the Utraquists decided that, I don't really like what's going on with these guys. These Taborites are too much of a nuisance for us. Let's get rid of them. So they sided with their counterparts in the Catholic Church and then also the Emperor and the HRE. And they joined together and defeated the Taborites. Now, the Hussite Wars lasted for a decent amount of time. I want to say it was like there's multiple phases of it, and it was like on and off fighting. Like sometimes they would be at war, but like they wouldn't actually fight each other. But the effect that it had on Bohemia, excuse me, was that it was a ravaged land now, and it was very war torn and weakened by these wars, which allowed it to never have its prestige really restored. Um, as later it would become dominated by the Habsburgs and then eventually annexed or integrated into the Habsburg domain. But for now, with the Hussite Wars, it really showed the idea of Czech nationalism and a separation of their identity from that of the Holy Roman Empire and from the Catholic Church, which again would later transfer into the Reformation uh, when nationalism became basically tied to the Protestant Reformation, a very dangerous aspect of it, really splitting up all these groups of people, even though, you know, most of them are very similar. For example, most of the Protestants are all German, but oh, we're this faith. Oh, you're that faith. We disagree on this one thing. Let's kill each other over it. And so, yeah, the Hussite faith, apart from being completely destructive towards Europe in the future, uh, was just a nuisance in general, allowing for Protestantism to become a thing